one thing you should always keep in mind. If you want people to change, you must first change yourself. You have to lead by example. You see, that's the key. You have to be the change that you wish to see.
Water around our planet appears in many forms: solid, liquid, and gas. These fundamental elements create many, many opportunities for life to flourish in a stunningly efficient variety of microclimates and habitats. Almost 70% of fresh water on our planet is held in glaciers and ice sheets. And the Arctic and Antarctica hold almost all of the ice on the Earth's surface. These polar regions are essential to the balance of our world. Ice keeps surfaces cool by reflecting up to 2/3 of all incoming sunlight. This phenomenon, albedo, helps to balance the temperatures of our planet. Floating sea ice is a unique ecosystem providing home to polar species. Today, disappearing sea ice threatens nature's living systems, which in turn endangers our homes and communities. Glaciers and ice sheets are retreating at a pace never predicted before, leading to a gradual freshening of the oceans, affecting currents and global weather patterns. We need to understand that when we accelerate the changing shape of our frozen landscapes, we're impacting the whole ecosystem of planet Earth. We take water for granted, even though it's something we all depend on. Just as we depend on air, whole living systems depend on ice. It's beautiful. It's clear. Our future depends on our efforts to save this form of water, the ice. The ice is vital. It is life itself.
Hi, I'm Aria Mckenna. I'm an actress, writer, director, producer, turned environmental activist and climate restoration advocate. As a mom, I believe that we must leave our children a planet that we can all be proud of. But as an environmentalist, I believe that we have a very narrow window left to save it. I do believe it is possible to turn the situation around, but we need a major movement to come together. And we've been missing one very important ingredient. We need media that helps simplify complicated environmental issues and solutions, to empower people around the world to make the changes we all need to make to protect our ecosystems and help them regenerate. I was born in Miami, Florida, ground zero for sea level rise in the United States, a town that already sees ocean waters flooding its streets on sunny days. And as a Floridian, I can tell you that we love the natural beauty of our state and we love our waters. But lately, toxic algae blooms and the climate crisis have been decimating our springs, wildlife, tourism, fishing industries, and endangering our health because of policies based on ignorance. Others around the world are experiencing their own impacts, and now climate scientists say that if we continue on this path, a glacier the size of Florida that's holding back 10 feet of sea level rise will be melted within 5 to 10 years. There are solutions, but we're not using them at the speed and scale necessary for them to work. We can't wait for politicians to get their acts together. We've got to take the power into our own hands, and this is why I founded Global Cooling Productions, to help create media that helps transform the system so that we can be proud of the world that we leave behind. And I've learned from so many experts around the world along the way. I trained with Al Gore in Texas and in Pennsylvania with the Citizens Climate Lobby. I've worked with the American Sustainable Business Council and lobbied in DC and outside of DC for climate action. I was a part of the American Renewable Energy Day Summit in Aspen, Colorado 3 years in a row. And I've worked with the Clio Institute to help pass a climate emergency declaration and a Rights of Nature Charter Amendment in Orange County, Florida. I've also worked in the narrative department of the Healthy Climate Alliance, which has helped put climate restoration on the map internationally, with support from the Pope. Lately, I've been working with climate scientists and biologists around the world through various coalitions, including the Healthy Planet Action Coalition, to push the G20 and COP26 to adopt a 3-pronged emergency scale plan to restore the climate and regenerate our natural systems. And yet, after many years pushing for political change, I've realized there are some politicians who will never lead their constituents on effective environmental or climate action. They are in fact waiting for their constituents to lead them. And that's why I'm creating Becoming the Change, shorts and interviews, a series of videos to help empower all of us to be the change that we wish to see in the world. Using the most up-to-date information we have, we will explore solutions to the environmental crisis and the real-world impacts that we're all facing because of today's system. I figure most of us are a work in progress, and so's the world. Let's explore what kind of world we can create together while we're all becoming the change.
You have to be the change that you wish to see. You got to be the change you wish to see. There is no combination to the lock, so here's the key.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I want to give a special thanks to the Arctic Arts Project for these beautiful videos that help bring some context to this extremely important discussion that we are about to have. Currently, the Arctic is actually warming 3 to 4 times the global average. And as you can tell, that last video that we saw about permafrost was a couple years old. And so the stats about 2019 being the hottest year on record have changed. So recently, we have even seen temperatures spike in the polar regions up to 70 degrees. These recent developments have not yet been folded into a global climate strategy. The Arctic warming pattern is not linear, it is exponential. I also want to give a disclaimer. These issues are not only about the Arctic. The problem is happening in escalating proportions in all of our polar regions. So I was inspired to host this gathering because I've had the good fortune to be working with the Healthy Climate Alliance and the Healthy Planet Action Coalition, who have been working to strategize a more holistic approach to restoring our climate. So the three-pronged approach, basically, yes, we absolutely need to reduce our emissions as soon as humanly possible, eliminating as much as possible any dependence on fossil fuels as far as I'm personally concerned. But we also need to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as soon as humanly possible. And there are many ways to do that. We also need to brighten the planet, which essentially equates to cooling the planet. We are absorbing heat because of a darkening that is happening simultaneously as our planet warms. So I think of this approach as merging both environmental justice issues on the ground and climate justice, which cannot be ignored. Justice must be at the center of everything that we do. So on that note, I would love to introduce our panelists. You can go ahead and turn your cameras on, everybody. We've got Peter Fiekowsky here, who just published his new book, Climate Restoration: The Only Future That Will Sustain the Human Race. He is an MIT-educated physicist and Silicon Valley entrepreneur and philanthropist who holds 27 patents. Peter formulated his goal of restoring the climate to safe levels as an extension of his work to help alleviate poverty. He's also personally responsible for enlisting support for climate restoration from the Pope, who included the framing in his encyclical. Thank you so much for being here, Peter. Also, we have Brian von Herzen. He is a PhD and the founder and executive producer of the Climate Foundation, which is dedicated to regenerating life in the ocean using marine permaculture technology. His approach also integrates cooling of the surface ocean water and the creation of kelp fertilizer for regenerative agriculture. Brian and his team recently won a $1 million X Prize for carbon removal. Congratulations, and thank you for being here, Brian. We also have Dr. Leslie Field, an engineer and a professor at Stanford University who has founded 2 nonprofits focused on preserving polar ice, including the new Bright Ice Initiative. The initiative works with local and indigenous communities to co-create and evaluate the safety and effectiveness of localized approaches to slow the melt of glacial ice. She is also an inventor and holds 61 U.S. patents. Stephen Salter is Emeritus Professor of Engineering Design at Edinburgh University. A scholar and activist in many fields, Stephen has founded a new company, Ocean Cooling Technology, to design seagoing hardware to reverse global warming by making clouds whiter and brighter. Thank you both. We also have Rafe Pomerance, the Senior Arctic Policy Fellow with the Woodwell Climate Research Center. He has recently served as chairman of Arctic 21, president of Friends of the Earth, and Senior Associate for Climate Change and Ozone Depletion Policy at the World Resources Institute. Rafe was also featured in Nathaniel Rich's New York Times Magazine article and subsequent book, Losing Earth. Rafe is also currently working with Rethink Energy in Florida to help address the state's vulnerability from sea level rise through innovative policy approaches. Thank you all for being here and for your amazing work. I'd love to start with a question for Leslie. I believe that there is another video that we have here that you are going to help put into context for us on how the poles have been warming exponentially and how it is related to that melting is related not only to sea level rise, but to the massive loss of biodiversity that we have been seeing in the oceans. Could you please explain this to us and share how your work helps to limit ice melt? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to do that. Thanks, Aria. So this is a video I didn't put together. This is a video put together by NASA, and it shows the relentless decline of bright reflective ice in the Arctic over the last few decades. It's a little blurry on my screen, but you can see month by month things are ticking along. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but things are ticking along here of ice loss and ice regrowth. What you see, are you seeing my cursor? You're seeing a lot of loss of this brightness here and a lot of outflow of bright reflective ice. And how this is happening is that we're still fortunate enough to regrow ice every winter, but it doesn't persist through the summer in as many places anymore. And so increasingly, we're growing our ice in the winter on open ocean rather than on a pack of already existing ice. And this means that it's thinner, it's less bright, it has less of those imperfections that help reflect things. And that is bringing us to a big accelerant to how much global temperature rise is happening from our changes to the atmosphere we've made through CO2 and increasingly now methane joining that, other greenhouse gases. And so right now, the combination of loss of reflectivity in the Arctic Ocean and in land ice as well, glacial ice, is accelerating things by what Peter Wadhams estimates to be 1.5, a factor of 1.5. So we're this tragic loss of ice, as you can see, is just making everything go faster. It's part of why probably we're being caught by surprise with how quickly temperatures are rising and species are going extinct. What happens when temperatures rise so quickly, the climate changes so quickly, is that species can't migrate at the same place at the same time to be having the same predator-prey food relationships that we've had before. So that's part of what helps drive extinctions. And I think, Aria, you wanted me to cover that. Yeah, thank you. It's an amazing video and ask.
Thank you. Yes, you did a wonderful job of explaining that the other day as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Leslie. And my next question is going to be for Brian. Brian, can we see you on camera? Excellent. Thank you.
Definitely.
So, yeah. So now, as you know, the Paris Climate Accord adopts the goal of achieving net zero by 2050 in hopes of reducing warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And this strategy supposes that temperatures will level out once we reach net zero, because natural greenhouse gas drawdown that does exist in our natural systems. Our soil, plant life, and oceans do absorb carbon dioxide, but our oceans absorb the most, and as our largest carbon sink. Now, unfortunately, that carbon absorption in the oceans is also currently harming sea life. And our natural capacity to absorb carbon dioxide in the oceans is not currently unlimited. So in very general terms, I'm hoping that you can explain how your approach helps expand the carbon capture capacity in the oceans and on land, while also helping to regenerate life?
Certainly. Thank you, Aria. One of my advisors, Richard Feynman at Caltech, they said there was plenty of room at the bottom. And what that means in this case is that there's plenty of room in the deep sea for additional carbon because there's 38,000 gigatons there already, and a third of humanity's carbon is already in the ocean today. And so it's not a problem of abundance, but distribution. The biological pump, of which these seaweeds are an example, can return that carbon to the deep sea from whence it came. Now, this is a picture of a marine permaculture platform for temperate to tropical latitudes that can fix carbon while establishing food security and regenerating ecosystems. What's intriguing in the Arctic context is that a similar upwelling system based not upon solar but upon wind energy could in fact bring enough water up to the surface and create a bit of an ice volcano that would actually help to refreeze up to a square kilometer of Arctic sea ice during the winter and enable up to 10 meters of ice to accumulate during that time. And that would keep the Arctic sea ice frozen during the summer. So we see this Arctic version of marine permaculture as a great opportunity to regenerate those marine ecosystems in that context.
Amazing. Thank you very much. As you know, I love your technique because of that focus of putting regenerating life at the center, and that it's so integrative, it's so holistic. So congratulations, your X Prize is well deserved.
Thank you, Aria.
Yeah, thank you very much. So next we have Stephen. We are going to ask Stephen. We saw some very dramatic videos that show how quickly our polar regions are melting. In addition to our greenhouse gas impact, this amplification is largely due to temperature-related feedback loops, including increased heat absorption from melting ice and darkening oceans. Now, you are working on some pretty fascinating technology that would help address these issues. Could you please explain this cloud brightening technology that you're working on and how it is that this could be a powerful approach to help reduce temperatures and preserve polar ice?
Right, you've got to understand all the energy flows. And at the moment, we're losing about 100,000 tons of ice a second for all the ice that's going. North, south glaciers, Greenland. And we know the latent heat of fusion of ice. So we know how many joules per second are going. So we know how many watts. And what we have to do is to find a way of reflecting the incoming watts to the Earth. And one way you can do this is to make clouds more reflective. This was studied by a chap called Sean Toomey. And he found that if you have a large number of small drops in the cloud, you get high reflectivity. But if you have the same amount of water in a smaller number of big drops, then it's a darker one. And we know that because we hear people saying the dark storm clouds are gathering when the drops are getting big enough to fall. And you can do a lovely demonstration of that in these two jars here. This jar is 4 millimeters, glass balls, spheres. And these are 40 microns. So there's 100 to 1 difference in the drop size, and you can see that one is grey and that one is white. And the next thing you need to know is that to make a cloud drop, you need to have a high relative humidity, but you also need a tiny little seed to get it started. And John Latham realized that you could make the suitable seeds by spraying tiny drops of salt seawater, and it would evaporate, and the little salt crystal is a perfect nucleus for the drop to grow on. And he asked me to design ways of making this spray, and the way we want to do it is to have ships that are driven by the wind, which are taking seawater and filtering it very carefully, and then squirting it through tiny nozzles and blowing it out, and then the turbulence in the air will spread it around, and the part of it that gets up to where the relative humidity is high enough will produce whiter clouds. And the amazing thing about it is the ratio of the energy that's reflected by a drop of a cloud compared with the energy you need to make the condensation nucleus on which it grew. And that ratio is hundreds of millions. So there's nothing else that I can think of that has the same ratio of energy gain. And the design of the ships to do this is pretty nearly finished.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know it's very highly technical when it comes to understanding impacts and how this technology actually works. I think that the heart of it, the fact that you're using natural seawater to spray into the clouds and working with nature to help protect nature is a really important detail. But we will definitely continue to discuss that, because I know there can be some caution that people have anytime you're talking about doing anything with the clouds. So that cognizance about working with nature, using natural processes to help correct the impacts that we've had is really critical and really key. So thank you so much, Stephen. My next question is going to be for Peter Fiekowsky. I'd love to see you, Peter. If you could just put your camera back on, Peter. I'm not seeing you.
Okay,
Peter!
Okay, I got on the wrong tab. It was terrible. It was a lonely place there. Thank you, Aria.
It's so easy to happen sometimes, isn't it? Suddenly there's 1,000 windows up.
That's right. And one of them was my notes. Anyway, yes. So Aria, let's talk about climate restoration.
Good to see you. So first of all, you brought me into this entire thing, and I just want to thank you for that. You were my segue into this group of brilliant climate innovators. So one of the things that has most inspired me about your approach, which places climate restoration, restoring our climate to safe levels at the center, is the understanding that if we're going to inspire people to act on climate, we need to give them a positive vision that actually feels worth fighting for. And the international community right now, in my perspective, seems to accept that we will not be able to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And if we only focus on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions alone, they're correct. We will not be able to get there. So why is it necessary for us to focus on going further than carbon neutral? Why must we create a carbon negative goal instead? And what is one of your favorite ideas to help us get there?
Okay. Well, almost all of us, I think all of us, want to leave a climate for our children that humans have survived long term. And if you think about it, you're probably like me, and you've probably never heard an expert say that even if we fulfill the Paris goals, will we have a good, even a decent chance of surviving? Because CO2 is already 50% higher than what it was while we developed agriculture and civilization. So in order to really guarantee that our children can have a planet that's livable for humans as we know it, we need to reduce the CO2. Now, the really good news is having a positive goal is much more effective than having a negative goal. So setting our goal of getting CO2 below 300 parts per million and doing that by 2050, while civilization is still intact and our ecosystems are still reasonably intact, it turns out that we have several methods that can do that, and they're all nature-based. Now, I'm a physicist, so I didn't do the nature-based on purpose. It just happened to be nature spent a long time trying things out, and one of the things that nature does is that you probably know, and I think the audience knows, that we have ice ages on our planet periodically. In order to do that, nature gets CO2 out of the air and stores it in the ocean in the form of biocarbon from photosynthesis. the work that Brian does with his kelp and seaweed is part of that. And so we can duplicate what nature does. That's one of the methods. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the other method nature does, and that's limestone. Over the life of our planet, nature has sequestered 99.9% of this carbon on our planet in limestone on the bottom of the ocean, basically shells from plants and animals. And we can do the same thing. So there's a company here in Silicon Valley which essentially imitates an oyster. Think of a lowly oyster in its beautiful shell, and it creates that shell in a year or something with very little energy. The chemistry is low energy. It actually produces heat. And they have opened their first factory last year. And the San Francisco airport has purchased most of their output for the next couple of years in order to build their runways and other parking lots and so on. So synthetic limestone is a great way to it can remove all trillion tons of excess carbon and actually sell it for the concrete in our roads and our buildings. We use that much in our roads and buildings as people build our cities. So that's one of my favorite ones. The other one, of course, is to duplicate how nature does photosynthesis in the ocean. But we'll go fast and just talk about the synthetic limestone. But
there's so much. Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, what's great about both of them is they're both commercially viable, and so they don't require any funding from the government. Now, government funding would grease the skids and make it go faster, but we don't know what the government is going to do. It just requires investment on the order of $1 billion a year for 5 or 10 years to lift these things forward.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Peter. I remember you telling me about this quite some time ago. And the whole synthetic limestone thing is very exciting, especially because concrete actually, right now, the way we create it is causing the problem. There's a lot of emissions involved in that. So you're taking something that currently is adding to the climate crisis and you're making it a solution. There are a lot of things that we can turn around our processes. The way that we do things has to be improved if we're going to be able to continue to exist and simultaneously solve a problem that affects all of us.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your work. Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And my next question is going to be for Rafe Pomerance. Great. Good to see you, Rafe. So now you have an extensive background in your understanding of ecosystems, the biosphere, and the Arctic, in addition to being able to navigate policy. And unfortunately, political will is one of the most challenging and critical issues needed to help move a holistic plan for climate restoration forward. Now, I know that you are currently working on an approach in my very vulnerable home state of Florida. Could you please help explain what this is and how this approach may give new hope to being able to break through some political gridlock we've experienced?
Right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh,
perfect.
Good. Okay. So what makes Florida important in the climate context? Why is Florida so important politically and substantively in a climate world of policymaking? And a couple of reasons. One is that Florida is a purple state in our national elections. And if Floridians ever figure out their own interests in climate solutions, we think that one approach to the politics of all that is that Floridians figure out that the viability of the state is what's on the line here. Once that happens, then the politics change. Now, it's been so bad that the former governor, who's now a senator, and the current governor, they barely admit that climate change is a real problem. I'm talking in blunt political terms here. Rick Scott, for 8 years as governor, he wouldn't permit the words climate change to be used. Now,
yeah,
and yet Florida's future is on the line. Its viability is on the line. And what we do not see is a sufficient political leadership from Florida on this that would be coincident with its interest. In other words, if Florida is going to remain viable, it has to slow and stop sea level rise, which occurs through a change in the emissions path, the use of carbon sequestration, and potentially solar radiation management, marine cloud brightening. So I've been working with friends and colleagues in Florida for a decade, and we're now working on a policy approach which would have the state decide that there was an upper limit to sea level rise in order that Florida have a future. Because sea level rise can go sufficiently high that Florida loses its viability. And those numbers are out there in the models. So Florida should be a world leader in getting the sea level rise problem under control. So we say our approach is the state of Florida needs to have an upper limit as a policy matter to sea level rise. And at the same time, then adopt an emissions path consistent with that upper limit and advocate for that nationally and internationally. So Florida, on the one hand, today, at least at the statewide leadership, is quite pathetic. And it would move from that to something much more aggressive, having realized that its future viability is on the line. And because Florida is a purple state, it's maybe one of the most important places politically in the country, if climate change becomes the issue it ought to be, and it's not just because of sea level rise, we think the politics can change, not only in the U.S., but globally. That's a summary.
absolutely. And obviously, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's been astounding to me, the contradictions when it comes to how people vote and what they say that they actually care for and what's important to them in the state. So they're, the irony of Florida saying you're not even allowed to mention climate change in any government legislation, any bills anywhere, which was the policy for some time, is clearly not to the benefit of the state. So I'm with you 100%, and let's just hope that we can get there. I think that if we can educate people, wake them up, make them understand that Florida could be a leader around the country.
Yeah,
so
can I just add a word to that? Is that some of the
Please.
County governments are way out front. There are county compacts of several counties working together, as in the Southeast, as in the Tampa area, Jacksonville, and so on, that are real leaders on this, county officials. So there's some hope there.
And I know there's been some political issues around even mentioning climate in the midst of that, where they're focused on resilience instead of saying, hey, let's create a policy to prevent damage. Instead, it's focused on resilience. It's a little tiptoeing that has to be done at this point. So that's something that needs to change. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Rafe. I really appreciate it. And now everyone can turn their cameras back on. I've got some questions for the entire panel, and I just want to open it up to discussion. One of the issues that we're facing in terms of trying to push this whole three-pronged approach and more of a holistic view and understanding of what actually creates warming is that a lot of people are afraid that if we focus on drawing down greenhouse gases, that we're giving free license to fossil fuel companies to continue with their horrible, environmentally destructive practices. And so my question is, does the focus on these additional strategies open us up to a moral hazard at all in your view? Just open that up to the floor.
Yeah, not at all, Aria. I think the essential thing is to understand that we must decarbonize our civilization by 80% or more. And as we're decarbonizing, we can also begin to draw down the 1,500 gigatons of carbon dioxide that humanity has put into the atmosphere over the last 200 years. So it's an absolute must, and we're working actively with Fortune 500 companies and others who are committed to Scope 3 decarbonization. And that means not only reducing or eliminating the carbon emissions of their own companies, but eliminating the carbon emissions of the consumers that use the products that they're producing. And that Scope 3 is to have the downstream emissions also addressed. So we see that as absolutely essential. First step is decarbonize. Second is draw down. And the third is to regenerate a healthy climate using whatever approaches are needed to cool the Arctic and refreeze the Arctic.
Wonderful. Anybody else want to chime
I'd love
in
to
on that?
jump in and say, I sort of skipped in narrating the movie there. What on earth do I do? We work on preserving and actually restoring Arctic ice, and we're using a material that looks on camera a lot like Stephen Salter's material. Hollow glass microspheres. These are amorphous. They float. It's very much like the sand and silica. Amorphous silica that's around the entire world in most of our ecosystems. So it's an engineered product, but pretty close to natural. And I would say the reason why I looked at, doing some kind of climate intervention is that it's essential, you're right, to decarbonize the economy. We got to do it. But it's clear that it's an embedded infrastructure that's going to take decades to get that job done, even if we were serious about it. And I'm not convinced we're serious about it yet. I mean, we as a group here, yes, but most of the world, perhaps not. It seems to be moving slowly. And so there are things that we need to do, for instance, stabilizing that reflectivity we used to have for free, right, up in the Arctic without our effort at all. We need to stabilize things like that to keep things from accelerating out of hand as they are now. And so it's an all-in time, right? And the projections go from you have to have it done by 2100 to no 2050. No, we've got a decade. No, many are now saying 3 years. So this is absolutely urgent to do everything we can think of that isn't going to cause harm by doing it, right? So that's a large charter for us all.
Agreed. I think of it as buying us time to do what we absolutely need to do when it comes to eliminating our greenhouse gas impacts as much as possible.
Absolutely.
I would love it if we could get off fossil fuels tomorrow, but there would still be warming as a result of that. And that's disrupting our weather systems. You had explained to me about the AMOC. And the loss of biodiversity. So speaking of moral hazard, I think it's a moral hazard not to do something about those issues. Does anyone else have anything they want to add?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that not only do we need to, but we are getting off of fossil fuels. We've made renewable energy considerably cheaper than fossil fuel. And it's going to take some time and several $trillion, many $1 trillion of investment to build the infrastructure, to build the electric cars, to build the solar farms. And we need to be patient because in physical reality, we have to build that infrastructure. We need to budget the money for that. And there's even if an oil company stops producing oil for us, another oil company will come into existence as long as we have gas cars and natural gas power plants. So we need to replace them. And so the fact that we're working to make the planet livable is really a benefit because, as you said, Aria, if our society collapses because the ecosystem collapses, and the sea levels rise, then we won't have a chance to build that infrastructure to get off of fossil fuel. So it's really important to do both. It's actually a moral hazard not to do both.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next question. So many planetary brightening measures are considered geoengineering at this point in time. And the concept of geoengineering is something people don't even want to discuss. There's, no consideration. It sounds very scary to people. It's got a terrible reputation. But global temperatures have risen in proportion to the general darkening effect on the planet from outer space. So there are many measures available to us to help brighten the planet that we are, where we can, including even just painting rooftops white. It's something I'm amazed that we aren't discussing something as simple as that as being a policy that's integrated on a wide scale basis. So how might we expand policy and public understanding to help move more comprehensive climate policies forward? Any ideas on that from anybody?
Well, I think the most critical thing, Aria, is for people to get very clear that they do want to restore the climate. They want to give our children a climate that we know works for human beings and humanity, and that we've already passed the point where stopping emissions won't take us back there. The only chance we have, given we want that result of humanity surviving, the only chance we have is by restoring CO2 levels. And I don't call it geoengineering. I call it terraforming Earth so that Earth looks like Earth again.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that we're kind of geoengineering right now, and the oil companies are given free license to do that. And when we're focused on trying to solve the problem that, they and other industries have created, there seems to be, oh no, we can't do that. And we need to, be cautious, of course. I think Rafe has something he wants to say.
Of course. Thanks. The problem is the clock, as you said earlier. This problem's been understood for a few decades now, well understood. And we're not, the amount of political will and progress has been insufficient with the time that we have. So we're stuck at 420 parts per million, and we're going to go up before we go down. So you have, the way I think of approaching this, and the Arctic is the great symbol of this, you have to use all measures that we have, as many of us have advocated, all the measures of emission reduction simultaneously. It's an all, not only emissions reductions, but the establishment of greater albedo or reflectivity to buy us time. So government has to approach all of this simultaneously. You can't do this in sequence. We have to figure out each piece of this now. And you think, oh, that's obvious. It's not obvious. It's not actually going on now. The politics of what we call geoengineering are fraught. And they're fraught for many, many sympathetic politicians, because there's a wing of environmental folks who are skeptical and opposed to this. And so the political problem around this is substantial. That said, I think the clock is the key here, and doesn't allow us the choice of waiting for things to happen.
Agreed.
Adding to what Rafe has said, I think there's a challenge and an opportunity. And our challenge is, the oil companies aren't actually forcing us to fly around the world or drive our cars. We're choosing to do that. So it begins at home with 80% decarbonization, and that means 80% less flying, 80% less driving. And then we require our companies to do that as well and be transparent about it. And that transparency of those economic reports, then you can vote with your feet. You can buy products that are carbon negative, including food, feed, and fertilizer. And so we see a great opportunity there. But getting back to restoring a brighter planet, is about restoring the sea ice, restoring the ice sheets, restoring the Himalayan glaciers and the Greenland glaciers and the Antarctic. And that's about having brighter ice. It's about having little ice volcanoes that can actually regenerate sustainable multi-year sea ice. And it's about restoring those natural ecosystems that gave us a brighter planet pre-industrially. So can we just go back to that? I mean, that's the challenge and the opportunity. And it's about environmental restoration is what it's about.
Thank you, Brian. I'll jump in on that because, I've just founded a new nonprofit to focus on glacial ice because I think we can get needed permissions more quickly than on sea ice, and that we can do good for local communities working with them in this way much, much more expeditiously than we could given the current policies and such for sea ice. And that's a huge opportunity and a huge need. We're talking about, sea level rise. If Greenland melts much, as much as has been predicted it could, of losing so many coastal communities. We're talking about drinking water for over 1.5 billion people in the Himalayan region. So it's really a humanitarian crisis right now, already happening and brewing to be far, far worse than we could imagine if we don't do something. So, there's a lot of action that needs to be taken responsibly, carefully, co-developing and making sure that we're working with something that's actually going to work for the people who live there, but helping the planet overall in addition for the longer term, which is really pretty dire mission, if you will, but it's awfully exciting too. We might actually make the difference in time to make a difference.
Can I jump in on something? Go ahead, Stephen. Sorry.
Okay. You can save the ice by doing cooling anywhere in the Earth. If you intercept heat that's going from the equator up perhaps along the Gulf Stream, you can do it anywhere. The only snag about that is it's a little bit slow to do, but you will stop hurricanes, will also save the Arctic ice. We must also remember that it isn't just the high temperatures that are worrying us. The extremes of extreme cold and extreme heat. People in Texas ought to remember what it was like last winter. But in a few months after that, you're getting temperatures of +30 in Siberia. And you could keep, you have an unacceptable Earth, which had exactly the same mean temperature as what we have now. So it's the variations as well as the mean that you must consider.
I appreciate that you brought that up, Stephen. Obviously, there are a lot of people who looked at what happened in Texas and thought that it was proof that global warming isn't happening because it's cooling here, whereas that was a relationship to the jet stream moving downward because of the polar temperatures warming and the weather patterns being affected by that lack of contrast in the places where that contrast in temperatures usually happens. I'm sure a lot of you understand all of that more than I do, but I've got the basics of it. Shoot, there was something I wanted to say, and I'm trying to remember what it was.
I got a quick comment.
I think we'll just move on.
For all the years I've been in the climate field, decades, the new concept in this discussion, and I'm sure it's been out there a while, but it's a very simple way of bringing the problem across, which is brightening the planet. I mean, the global warming problem has never been described at a kind of a public level as brightening versus darkening and what that means. I just think it's a kind of a neat way to do this, or an additional way.
Awesome. I love that. And I feel like that ties to what I wanted to say, actually, is that one of the main issues that I see is that a lot of people are turning away from all of this. They're, I've got a friend who's been trying to get CNN and major networks to cover these types of issues for decades, and they basically just ignore her because they say, well, people are going to tune out. It's too depressing. No one wants to watch this existential crisis. It's too much for people. And so therefore we've been steadily marching towards the point of no return because we don't want to talk about it. So the whole concept of focusing on restoring the climate, focusing on the solutions and what we can do at this point is going to be a vital piece of how do we actually solve the problem. We're not going to solve the problem if we don't have realistic conversations about where we're at and what we can do to change the situation and to create some kind of positive vision of something for us to fight for instead of only fighting against. We do need to fight against the system, but we also need to fight for a better system.
I'm in touch, of course, in my Stanford class, Engineering, Entrepreneurship, and Climate Change, with students who come in and then tell me in their summaries, I'm so tired of hearing about climate change, gloom and doom, but I've heard this class focuses on what we can do, on solutions. And many of you here on the call have been guest lecturers in my class. So, it actually helps keep hope alive to have a group of people like this, to be in touch with each other and see all the positive things one can do. So what you're doing here, Aria, is awfully important.
Thank you.
I agree. And Aria, from that perspective, restoring planetary brightness to pre-industrial levels is absolutely key. And that begins with sea ice and extends to ice sheets and glaciers. Within the last 24 months, cities and towns in Siberia exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer. And that just portends that in the next decade, we're going to lose all the Arctic sea ice in the summer. Imagine an Arctic Ocean with no sea ice at all. That'll be the first time in recorded history that, a history of humanity, that this has occurred. And that's going to be a daunting prospect because in the summertime, you actually get more sunlight at the North Pole than you do at the equator because it's sunlight 24 hours a day. And so if we don't restore the Arctic sea ice brightness, we're in for a terrible amount of warming and the prospect that even in the wintertime, we may not have sea ice.
Not to mention the methane that happens because of that, right? The methane really is danger there. It's really, awful prospect.
That's true. I mean, you thought 1,500 gigatons was bad. Try 5,000 gigatons of CO2 equivalent with the Arctic methane. And the submarine permafrost is bubbling up every year. And we're seeing an exponential increase in the number of methane craters in Siberia. These are explosive craters that actually, they're these giant vertical craters 200 feet across that are doubling in number each year in Siberia because of gas building up under the permafrost and blowing through the permafrost, methane gas.
Yeah. And Leslie and I touched upon this the other night as well. The impacts of methane have not been folded into our policies at all either. Natural gas has been pushed as being this number one solution, and yet we're leaking massive amounts of methane whenever we frack. And when it goes through the pipeline, we're releasing more methane through all of those pipelines as they're leaking, which was not, that information was not gathered before, but now we know that that's the case. So we've embraced a lot of false solutions, but methane's warming can be considered, some numbers say 86 times worse than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. And that's not even taking into account the front warming, which is even exponentially higher, and the potential additional methane that gets released because of that front end warming in polar regions.
That's so true, Aria. And few people have realized that this year's methane will do more to contribute to the next 20 years of warming than this year's carbon dioxide emissions. And thankfully, Peter and others are working on approaches to try to reduce the amount of methane in the atmosphere. But I think it is a critical first gear in decarbonization and greenhouse gas reduction.
Yeah. And I'm so happy to be able to work with and be in touch with all of you guys, because I certainly have had my issues with general eco anxiety. And so to me, the way out of that is by working for change. Otherwise, it is all overwhelming. So hopefully we can ignite more people and start having more comprehensive
I would just say on
conversations.
methane, there are both regulatory and voluntary programs and identification of sources to be controlled. It's not comprehensive. I think even at the COP in Edinburgh, there was a joint statement on methane that was could be pretty important. There's a sort of a growing focus on it. It's insufficient, but it's out there, and there's been a lot of identification of various measures that can be taken. And that said, I think the methane concentrations have been growing very rapidly, which is really troubling.
Yeah, and the fact that there's so many natural sources of methane now that we have unleashed because of our dependence on the fossil fuels, as well as industrial agriculture and other sources of warming that we've been supporting, essentially. That's definitely scary to me. I do have another question for everybody. Now, not all solutions. We've got, we know a lot of people who have a lot of solutions. We've touched upon a few of them here, and not all of them are created exactly the same. There are some things that are considered geoengineering, for instance, that I don't feel comfortable embracing. And then there are other solutions that I feel quite comfortable embracing. And like, this is something we need to start doing immediately. So what kind of due diligence and vetting methods do we need to utilize to make sure that there are no unintended consequences for these types of projects?
Well, can I offer a comment there? A central pillar of climate policy is high-risk R&D. We have a program in the U.S. government now called the Advanced Research Projects Administration Energy. Its mission is to fund research projects on revolutionary technologies. It's too small, but in the R&D, a comprehensive R&D effort on climate solutions would evaluate the risks of every kind of new technology. That's a process point. We can do it. We know how to do it. And the R&D component of climate policy has been identified as a long-term priority. We now have an institution, actually, that could be built, increase. The DARPA, the Pentagon's R&D operations, like $5 billion. I think ARPA-E is less than $500 million a year.
There's one
Thank
indicator
you
that you
for
can use,
bringing
which
that
is
up. That's
how
so
reversible
important.
is it? How quickly can you stop it? That's a thing you can put in.
Stephen, thank you for that. That's
Yes,
one of the things that it's why I like surface albedo modification, because you can see what you're doing. You could, in concept, reverse it, although, it could be a little hard in practice, but you can do things carefully and you can actually see what you're doing, see if there's an unintended consequence. If there's one thing all this gray hair has bought me, it's, years of being an engineer, it's knowing that unintended consequences will exist. You just want to plan for, how quickly will you be able to react to them? And are you sure that what you're working on doesn't have any? And you go into it, you test, you say, yeah, everything we know says this is safe. And you keep on testing just to be sure. You keep on observing, because the unexpected, is something that you should just expect. And if you do that carefully enough and test things over small enough areas so you can actually get your answers, then you've got a deep understanding. At this point, we've been doing the kind of thing I've been doing over a decade, looking at these things very, very carefully.
The other thing that I like to think about is just gathering various scientists of different areas of expertise, biologists, people who are experts in, ecosystems, and putting all these brilliant people essentially in a room together and sharing information like so many in this group have been doing. But we may not have quite as many marine biologists like Brian. And we've got a lot of engineers, and the more we communicate and agree that we have to do everything in our power, that we are facing this is a moral imperative to do everything we can to respond to the climate crisis, because it affects everybody on the planet, and the effects are going to be quite dire. So if we understand that, then we can have more coalitions, more funding. But we need to elevate the understanding of the issues and the understanding of the solutions, and get more people to collaborate in research and development and utilization, and exactly what Stephen says and what Leslie says of being able to watch carefully and reverse if need be.
You're absolutely right about
Aria?
the collaborations. I got so excited when we connected with a group of marine biologists who could help us evaluate what's happening with climate modelers. You need that. You need the whole scientific peer review process. You just need openness and transparency and get past those silos. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Aria,
Rafe.
the
Yeah.
cooperation is a key aspect of it. And part of it is we need to build an atmosphere of trust, because for various reasons, there's been a lot of distrust formed. It's become very political. And when things become political, human beings have a tendency to hide. And so I'm intimately familiar with all of the major methods of increasing reflectivity, of getting massive amounts of CO2 out of the atmosphere. As Stephen said, every single one of them is easily stopped within months or weeks. And so if there were an unexpected harm caused, it would be stopped before it caused anything significant. And in every case, no one has proposed anything significant. That is, the experts have looked at them. I'm not saying that they're safe without testing. I'm saying it's important that the overall community have a sense of trust that we're all going to do this together, and that no one's making money on this. So it's, or not, I think a few people are making at least a salary, but everyone I know involved in this is mostly doing it as a volunteer. Even the scientists and engineers, and it's not. We're doing it because we have children or we have nieces and nephews. And so the support is very important, because if there's distrust, it's this human nature to hide, and that's where you cause problems. So we really need both sides to help.
And I think it's so important what you said, to understand that we are here for the right reasons, that we care about the planet, we care about I say future generations, but it's not even future generations at this point.
That's right.
This is going to be affecting us, it's going to be affecting our children, it's going to be affecting their children. This is now. It's going to affect all of us. So having that value system solid, and understanding that we are coming to the table because of shared values, hopefully will facilitate more trust and more exploration and open some minds. On that note, I do want to make an announcement that everyone who is in the audience right now should have the ability to ask a question or ask to join the call. So if anyone does have any questions, any ideas or thoughts, or want to join the discussion for any reason, talk about what they're working on and how there might be some collaborations, please feel free. I think it's toward the bottom of the screen. Go on, Brian.
Yes, Aria, I actually have one from Doug Grant, who's made a wonderful chart that I think illustrates the need to go beyond net zero emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the key part of that is it's really quite insightful. He's made a chart over the last couple of years that I'll briefly share on the screen.
Awesome.
Now, our life business as usual is the brown curve, and that's just business as usual under our CP 8.5. If you actually eliminated all of the sulfur emissions associated with those fossil fuels, you'd actually get extra warming, and that's the green curve. That's even higher. And so ironically, getting to zero, but it would also reduce those SO2 emissions. And this green curve is global decarbonization by 2050, but with none of the SO2, it would actually increase the temperature. Now, the red curve is with carbon dioxide removal to reduce atmospheric CO2 towards pre-industrial, but we've still baked in decades, if not centuries, of warming, and that's really concerning. And it's only by restoring Arctic sea ice and other ice that we get to the blue curve and get back to a healthy climate within our lifetimes. So restoring the planetary brightness is absolutely essential to getting back to a healthy climate in the coming decades. And I think it's just so poignant. We need to understand we need to do more than just decarbonization.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you brought that and shared it on the screen. I know that's something he's been working on, and I appreciate it. It is very good to have a visual sometimes to show why it is that we need certain techniques, and we can't just stay stuck on the one solution alone. And it's amazing to me that there even seems to be some hostility at times if you talk about any of these other solutions. And I want to just also explain that I do understand that distrust. You know, I understand why people don't want to give excuses excuses to fossil fuel companies to continue with business as usual, for instance, because there are so many environmental justice issues. There's people around a power plant who have cancer clusters, brain cancer around coal-fired power plants and, fracking sites, all of that. So we can't have our solutions, any of these solutions can't be in a silo. We have to put that justice at the issue, at the center of it. And we have to really feel a strong level of accountability about any of these solutions that we adopt, that they are going to be as responsible as possible. So for instance, right now, we're pushing for electrification because we have to solve the climate crisis, but some of that mining for the battery storage also creates some serious problems. And those have been little mini sacrifice zones to help deal with the climate issue. But there are more sustainable ways to do that. And there are advancements that really lower the impacts of being able to create lots of battery storage. So we can't, it's such a complicated multi-level issue when it comes to solving these problems. And it's just not thoroughly understood enough that oftentimes we're just kind of, we get this, oh, we're going to be for this and against that without having that accountability at the center of it and recognizing that we have to put people above profit, essentially. So I understand the distrust, but we can't afford to let that hold us back from dealing with these horribly devastating climate issues that affect everything.
I think that something people lose sight of, too, is thinking that the baseline is, it's today. I'm looking out at beautiful weather. It's a wonderful temperature. And that's what happens if we do nothing for climate. Well, that's not right, right? What happens if we don't take some actions to change the trajectory we're on is that things get really pretty dire. The already bad fire danger risk that we have here in California in the West gets worse and worse and worse. It does not get better if we don't take action. So you can't just comfortably look out your window and say, hey, it's a beautiful day today. There's no problem. Let's not take any action. That's not that's not the way it's going to go. If we take no action, all the crises we're seeing already in climate are just going to get far worse.
Yeah,
that's right. And we've been getting a free pass to some extent, because while you're melting ice in a glass, and just think of the planet as an ice water glass, and you've got Arctic ice, you can keep melting ice and melting ice and melting ice, and the temperature won't change. But as soon as the ice is gone, the temperature skyrockets. Okay. So first and foremost, I think we get the social acceptance for this by working to restore natural Arctic ecosystems. Who doesn't want more habitat for polar bears and walruses, more habitat to enable the penguins to do well, and the other life in the ecosystem, and not to mention the third pole, and that is the Himalayas, which has water, frozen water for 2 billion people. What happens when the last bit of that ice melts and the last bit of water goes down the river, and then 2 billion people are out of water? I mean, that's what we're talking about on this planet. So we've got to get back to healthy ecosystems, and that means restoring the brightness of the Arctic so that we can get back to a healthy ecosystem there. And that's going to drive the wonderful, that's the planetary cooling that we had pre-industrially. We've got to get back there. And I think it's involved some of these approaches to restoring these natural ecosystems.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've seen over and over again since I started this journey and started working and talking with environmentalists and climate activists is how many of the issues that the scientists have been talking about at conferences nobody really knows about, no one talks about, no one does anything about. And I'm like, oh my God, there's going to be water shortages happening around the world. What are we going to do about that? But people don't do anything because of that ignorance. And oftentimes it's too overwhelming to confront. But time and time again, the science is proven right. And so anyhow, I just wanted to,
So
we have to do something before we get to that place, not after.
yeah, Aria, when it comes to what people can do individually, by far the most powerful thing people can do is encourage young people to have fewer children. The fact that we have 10 times as many people on our planet as it was when the planet was stable might suggest to people that it really is people who burn pollution. And although it takes time, for a smaller family to impact, once you're committed to restoring the climate, then naturally the thing to do is also have small families so we get a sustainable population. And that's something everybody can do. That's the wonderful thing.
I think Peter's right. Enabling and providing women around the world with voluntary family planning is absolutely essential to, increase the choices that women have to have careers and be able to have smaller families when they want to. I think that is really essential. And those long-acting reversible contraceptives have been pioneered in China and elsewhere. The technology is affordable and implementable, and yet there are hundreds of millions of women around the world without access to that kind of voluntary family planning.
Yeah,
That's absolutely
education's
essential.
the other part
And
of
I
then
think
that.
a lot of,
I'm sorry. Yeah, education's the other part of that. Letting women go to school, girls go to school. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
here's the really great part is I've done the modeling and worked with others on the population modeling. If our planet averages the birth rate of Italy, which is not particularly low, but it's a fairly low birth rate, then by the end of this century, we would actually have a sustainable population again. So it's extremely doable. And I have children in their 30s. Young people these days are really having second thoughts about having a lot of children or even any children. And that's something to encourage for the time being so we can get back to a population that our planet has sustained. If our planet could have sustained more, it would have. And that's why we reached an equilibrium for 10,000 years.
Well, unfortunately, I think that a lot of the younger generation doesn't want to have kids because of the situation that we're in, and
Yes.
that we have been heading in the wrong direction in a lot of respects. And it's unfortunate that those are the reasons why not.
We can honor their intelligence rather than poo-poo them for not understanding what life was like when we were kids. They actually are very wise young people, and the young women are very, very wise, and that's one of the missing things. Is just tell them the truth, and they will make wise decisions.
We've got something from Janet Apuzzo. I hope I'm saying the name Puzzo. For those climate activists, we would like to have some concrete actions, links, so on, that we can share. Okay. Definitely, I want to say that we are going to follow up from this call with everyone who signed up and give them a video of this recording, as well as additional information about everyone who has been on the call and the work that they're doing, so that you can go there and support and learn more. And if you continue following, definitely through Becoming the Change, that's a lot of my goal, is to give more people more empowering things that can be done on a personal level as well. So, and it looks like we do have some questions that I have missed. So I'm going to need to scroll up. I don't know.
While you're doing that, can I say a little
Yeah.
bit about my book and about the foundation? These are things that
Beautiful.
people can do. So
Please do.
my book came out last month, Climate Restoration, the only future that will sustain the human race. It talks about the 4 key solutions that are already being scaled. And it talks about what individuals can do, what corporations can do, what governments can do. So I highly recommend it. The bottom line on it is we need to tell our decision makers, the funders, the foundations, that we actually really do want to restore the climate. That's been hidden from the options. The IPCC never gave a pathway to restoration, and I think that will end this year.
So I want to chime in for a moment. I've got a question from Janice Hall, and I saw that Brian answered her question, but I don't know if she's able to see it or not. Janice Hall says, what is synthetic limestone made from? And Brian answered calcium carbonate. And so that company, Blue Planet Ltd, I believe, is the one that has been doing some carbon sequestration and then using that carbon to create the synthetic, the calcium carbonate, and make the concrete as an ingredient for the concrete, correct?
Yeah, they renamed to Blue Planet Systems. So now you know.
Okay, great.
Yes.
And then Carol Douglas chimed in, limestone is nearly half carbon dioxide by weight. What else do we, okay, so maybe people are seeing this chat. Okay. So Doug Grant also commented, he said, Rafe, I love the idea of an upper limit on sea level rise. What level of sea level rise aligns with 1.5 degrees Celsius? That's a great question. What level of sea level rise aligns with Jim Henson at the 350 ppm target? And how long might it take to turn this ship around? It's a lot.
I think one of the challenges there, Aria, is that 1.5 degrees doesn't guarantee a level amount of sea level. It commits us to a sea level rate increase, and that's like how many, how many meters per decade it's going to go up. So for us to get back to a steady sea level, we're going to have to get back to below 350 parts per million. That's the reality that we have to deal with, is that we've baked in centuries of sea level rise unless we get back to a healthy climate, regenerate a healthy climate in our lifetimes. And that's why, decarbonization is a start. Drawdown will help, but we need to do things like restore the Arctic sea ice in order to actually get back to a healthy climate in our lifetime.
So in the book, I talk about what happens when we do restore the climate. We restore CO2 to pre-industrial. And the bad news is there's no modeling that suggests that sea level won't be still catastrophic, even if we get the CO2 down. Now it's possible, it's just, and that modeling maybe hasn't been done yet. But the truth of the matter is, we have to expect sea level to continue rising a meter or 2 meters, and until the government pays scientists to model climate restoration. There's no other data other than that, because Greenland is destabilized and Antarctica is destabilized. They may be able to be restabilized, but no one knows yet.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the bottom line is that we have to do everything that we possibly can right now. I've asked a lot of questions along that line too, and seem to keep coming back to it's so hard to predict at this point because we have taken things so far beyond where they should have been allowed to go. So, but we have to pull out all stops to do everything that we can. Now, I've got another question also from Suzanne Reed. To all the panelists, can we hear about how the technologies and strategies you propose contribute to a circular economy? Anyone want to chime in on that?
Well, I'll say not only does marine permaculture help, but the Blue Planet carbon negative concrete. I was amazed to read that it was like 50 billion tons of concrete are used per year, up to 70 billion tons of concrete are being used per year. So it's a huge amount. And that's a great example of a circular economy where you can effectively capture CO2, make aggregate, make carbon negative concrete, and start putting it into San Francisco runways and everything else that uses concrete. So we really need to insist as consumers to buy carbon negative products. If you're going to put in a concrete driveway, make it carbon negative. If you're going to build the next house, use carbon negative concrete. And simpler things, just simple food and other products, choose carbon negative and vote with our feet. That's the most important thing we can do. Again, Dick Feynman told me back in graduate school at Caltech, vote with your feet, work on projects that are going to be transformative and make a difference. And we're looking for volunteers and contributors to our marine permaculture efforts at the Climate Foundation. It's vote with your feet and work on things that are really meaningful, and vote with your feet with consumer products that are carbon negative. I think that's going to be a good start.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to add a little plug.
Sorry. Sorry. Well, I was just going to say on the circular economy, there's a new the kinds of materials we use, these kind of floating sand that's now made out of recycled glass. And we're helping the vendor understand a little bit about the properties. A student group helped us characterize some of those for them and for us. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, as you say. But Aria, I'm sorry.
And with Blue Planet systems, their main source of calcium now is demolished concrete. In every city, there's hundreds and thousands of millions of, a lot of tons of demolished concrete when they tear down old buildings and old roads, and their process will recycle that to get the rock back and get the calcium from the cement back. So that's going to be a very big deal.
Wonderful. All I was going to add before is just that when it comes to carbon negative, one of the things that I happen to love is that I bank with Aspiration Bank. So when I drive, trees are automatically planted every time I fill up with gas, because unfortunately I haven't been able to get an electric car yet. And that continues to happen. I've just, got that choice in there that there is money that goes toward tree planting and projects that will draw down carbon when I shop as well, because there's an impact with everything we do. So we just have to find ways to reduce impact wherever we can. And I want to just add, I see a note here saying, as I finally have seen the chat here, Colleen Brennan also said, Save Our Planet, Refillery, addressing the global plastic waste crisis, new infrastructure with technology to removing packaging increases profits for all industries. Sell business to business, 2C, I'm not sure about this, B2B2C, SOP systems to reduce product and operating costs, 20% waste, 100%, and mega billion tons of carbon emissions with new reuse habits. So that's something I think would probably be worth getting into. But I don't have all of the context, but I just wanted to try to make sure I caught up on any of these
We've
comments.
got
that
another
had
neat
been
one from Janice
missed.
Hall about hempcrete, which Brian has responded to. That's interesting.
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad I see Brian has done a pretty good job of
He has.
responding to a lot of these. Thank you.
Just call me Trim Tab.
What is it?
To quote a famous Buckminster Fuller. On Buckminster Fuller's epitaph, he said, "Call me Trim Tab," because the Trim Tab is the little control that turns the rudder, that turns the ship, that changes the world. And the same happens with airplanes. So let's all be Trim Tabs on this planet.
Let's all be Trim Tabs
in our lifetime.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you. Okay. Well, we are at 5:34 right now. I'm just finishing out this scrolling to see there's nothing else major that was, I guess Janet has replied about moving her money out of Bank of America and Chase, which is great. We've got a lot of really great people on this call, obviously watching, who are all doing their parts and have some wonderful solutions that they're working on as well, which is wonderful. So, but I think that's it. We have gone just a little bit over time. And I just want to thank everybody again for taking the time to talk with me and for all the work that everyone is doing here. You guys give me hope. And so let's continue being Trim Tabs together. Thank you for watching the Emergency Arctic Response Roundtable. The situation is dire, but it is not without hope. But we need you to help keep hope alive. And the greatest hope right now lies in massive action from all of us. We need you to support the many people, technologies, and policies dedicated to turning this situation around for all of us. Can we set aside our differences and act together? Whether you're conservative, liberal, libertarian, or progressive, our friends, loved ones, and our children need us to do everything it takes to bring hope back. I hope that these conversations give you hope, that we can do this, but we can't do it alone. We need your help. We need you to vote for climate action, both at the ballots and with your actions, with how you eat, where you shop, how you travel, where you put your money, what you say, and what you do. Breaking old habits may not be easy, but change is coming, whether we like it or not, and it's time for all of us to try to become a change for the better together. This is the first in a series of discussions that I will be having as part of my new podcast and YouTube series called Becoming the Change, where we help turn eco-anxiety into hope with the help of real-world experts and action takers like you. If you want to learn more about what you can do or about any of the panelists, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also sign up for updates or donate to help support more empowering climate content at becomingthechange.us. That's becomingthechange.us. Let's all do our best to become the change we want to see in the world together. Thank you so much.
Ilo ya no di kita la kayo شي بحكي everything is your life